This is the Straight Truth Podcast, biblical answers to difficult questions from a Christian worldview. Welcome again to the Straight Truth Podcast. My name is Josh Philpot. I'm your host. I'm joined by Pastor Richard Caldwell, Founders Baptist Church. This is episode number 337. What I'd like to discuss today is kind of like a theology of aging, maybe. We have talked about aging into later years, preparing for eternity, really. We've talked about that on this podcast, but I want to really focus on this time period in adolescence, moving to adulthood. And really the impetus for this and the thought line that I'm tracing here, I wanted to ask you about, comes from reading Luke 2 and in reading about Jesus as a boy at the temple. Everyone knows the story, and his parents leave the temple. It's the Passover celebration time, and they don't have Jesus with them. They go back, they find him. He's at the temple, and of course he's teaching the scribes that are there as well. And they're I don't know if it's fair to say they're incensed with him. They're certainly surprised and feel like he has
mistreated them
in some way. I mean, they don't really say he hasn't been obedient, but they're saying, "Are you not even concerned?
Right.
Your parents are concerned."
Right.
I mean, most parents have felt this before, and then though at the end there are two statements that stand out to me. Of course, Jesus says, "I must be about my Father's business," and he says, it says there afterwards, Luke 2:51. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was submissive to them. So he's 12 years old, and at that age, he's still being submissive to his parents. And then it says, the next verse, and Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. So we see in Jesus, the only story we have of him as a boy other than his birth.
Yeah.
The only story we see a kind of growth, and you can correct this if I'm wrong about this, but as I think about it, a kind of growth from dependence on parents, and then to independence. And you see him as a 12-year-old kind of taking an independent move there. I'm going to go over here. My parents are going to go do this, and I'm going to be focusing on these other things. So I'm thinking about that in relation to parenting in general. I'm not sure what kind of principles you might say about this, but I wonder if this story has any bearing on how maybe we even disciple our own children into adulthood, how we lead them, and if not, that's totally fine. It's just an interesting passage to me, and I wonder though what you might say about that question, because this is certainly something parents deal with. My child is 12, 13 years old. They're maturing. They are still dependent completely on us, and yet they're getting into the stage 15, 16 years old, and then you can start to see that they're about to head out into adulthood and into the world. How do you do that well? What are some principles that parents can think about?
Just thinking about that passage, I mean, so there are elements there that are unique to Christ, obviously. His statement, "I must be about my Father's business," is a clue into that. We have the Son of God here on earth and the Messiah. There's an assignment, a responsibility, a purpose, a future for him that is absolutely unique to him, that we can't really apply at all to us. And so there's that element of it. At the same time, the statement that he remains subjected to them and all the rest speaks of the responsibilities that he had that belonged to all humanity. And he was faithful, perfectly faithful to every responsibility assigned to all humanity. So you have this unique assignment. This is the Son of God. This is the Messiah. You have this common assignment, which is he is a child subject to his parents. And he was faithful in all of that. Mm-hmm. At the same time, his parents had to be mindful. I mean, Mary and Joseph obviously understand who he is. Mm-hmm. She's informed by angels as to who he is. And so
it says here, his mother treasured up all these things in her heart. I love those statements.
Absolutely. So they too have a unique responsibility to parent their son in a way that would honor God, at the same time to understand the uniqueness of his person and his calling, which would be just an amazing heavy-duty responsibility given to a parent. And so you see that on both ends. I think the principle we can lift from that and apply is we too have to be mindful that while we are training our children, we're training them for something. And obviously, we're training them for someone. Our prayers that the Lord would save our children, our prayers that they would be true, genuine disciples of Christ and of the living God. And so we are training them always in light of their adulthood. If the Lord should be gracious and allow our children to live into adulthood, we're training them with that trajectory in mind. And we're training them with service for God ultimately in mind. And both of those goals mature adulthood and mature discipleship, both of those goals will involve a letting go as time goes by. That's hard for parents to do.
Yeah, that's hard. How do you do that? How do you do it well?
And knowing that we must is a part of doing it well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think where you see sort of heavy-handed parenting that doesn't allow children really to mature, it's almost like you don't have the end in view. It's like you're living so much in the moment that you think the moment is going to last for forever, like they're going to always be 10 or always be 11 or always be 12, and they're not going to always be 10, 11, or 12. And so I need, as a wise parent, to not be unfaithful to the moment. They are 12. They're not 17.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to treat them like they're 17 when they're 12.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got to be faithful to the moment, but I've got to be faithful with that trajectory always in my mind. I'm raising them for mature adulthood, and I'm aiming at mature discipleship. How can I manage, through my parenting, how can I manage their childhood in a way that I'm equipping them and mentoring them into the life they're going to know beyond this season of parenting them? And that really is my responsibility. You know, in our seminary here, we talk about mentorship and apprenticeship. Well, there's sort of a mentorship and apprenticeship that belongs to parenting. I want to walk alongside my children in a way that helps them prepare for adulthood, and I want to put them in situations where they get to experience a measure of freedom with oversight, a measure of freedom with friendship that allows me to help them develop in those realms of freedom. And it really is an art and a skill that requires the Spirit of God in my life as a parent to help me be wise, that nobody bats 1,000 on, that we all fail at.
It's comforting.
But knowing that we have to aim at that and striving to aim at that, I think is a part of doing it well. So I would encourage parents not to be so short-sighted as to only keep today in mind. You have to parent today with tomorrow in mind, with the future in mind, and keep aiming at that.
Do you think parents maybe are fearful a little bit? It's like you always know that you have these children for roughly 18 years, and it seems like now that has been extended out with a lot of children living at home still. But let's just say 18 to 22 years, you have them for this short amount of time, and you don't want to let them go.
Yeah.
Like you're fearful of maybe losing this child, not losing them totally, but just losing them from this closeness that you've always had. Do you think that's a fearful response in parents?
I do, Josh. I also think it's a little bit off the beaten path, but I've thought about it a lot, so I'm going to bring it up. Our current time's love affair with sentimentality. So, you watch the Hallmark commercials, often reflecting on the past, things that have happened in the past.
They're nostalgia.
Yeah, nostalgia. And you see it on television shows, you see it in movies, this looking back with the desire to hold on to the moment. I mean, that is the very definition of wanting this temporal world to be for forever, and it's not for forever. And so what sort of has characterized the culture in general, which is looking back, holding on to the past, thinking about the past, I think can plague parents as well, so that we're so holding on to what we love about today that we're almost in denial about tomorrow. And if we're living our lives with eternity in view, then we will cherish today. Mary cherished up those things, treasured those things in her heart. They informed her. I think she also had an appreciation for the glory of what she was involved with. And there's a sense in which I'm thankful for the glorious season. Right now I have 11 grandchildren. I love their ages. I often kid with my oldest granddaughter, and I've told you to stop growing up. When are you going to listen to me? And she just keeps growing up. You wish you could make time stop, but it doesn't. And it won't. And we are headed for eternity, and this is temporal. And if I can bear that in mind, then I will see parenting as investment. The end game is not today. It's down the road. And I want to be a good investor in their souls, in their lives, to help shape them, not only for their tomorrows, but for forever, with eternity in view. And I think if I can bear that in mind, it helps my parenting decisions. It helps me to let go in some ways and let them grow up in some ways that they're going to grow up with me or without me. And I want them to grow up in a way that I'm actually having a voice in how they're growing up. I'm having an influence in how they're growing up. And a part of that is just consciously myself acknowledging that and then making an investment in light of that.
Yeah, I liked how you said earlier about walking alongside your children, and it just makes me think like, well, you could actually extend that a little bit, where maybe when they're children, little kids, you're more like walking in front of them. You're kind of pulling them along, and then, but as they mature into 12 to maybe 15, 16, you're walking alongside of them, and then as they get into adulthood, it's like you're behind them. You're kind of coaching them along the way.
I love that,
and allowing
Josh.
them to lead.
I think it's a great illustration. I think one of the evidences that we're living in a time when that's not being done very well, that we're not actually helping them prepare for adulthood, is the length of time now it's taking people to grow up. I mean, you're seeing people, getting close to 30 who still live like they're 15.
Yeah, exactly. Act like it too.
And act like it. And it's because we're not taking our task of preparing them for adulthood to heart. So I think it's producing a perpetual immaturity that is showing up all over the culture.
Yeah, and I think you've even mentioned on this podcast just how wonderful it has been being married young as well, and you're never really ready for that, right? There's no like amount of preparation you can go to really be ready for it, but it was something that accelerated your maturity, gave you a closeness in a relationship, and to start a family young, and the Lord really used it to bless your home.
Amen. I was a dad at 22, and which is if people could just see it, I mean, it's glorious now. I'm 61, but I have children in their 30s, one who just turned 40, and to be able to enjoy their children with them at a younger age, is a sweet thing. And so everything you put off, in this age we're living in of perpetual immaturity, everything you put off is in a sense robbing you of joys you could know if you had embraced adulthood earlier. So to help our children see that and do that, and one of the things that's really encouraging to me in our church life is to watch how many people are marrying young.
Yeah, I love it.
Right now, I love it too. I mean, they're marrying young. They're going to have their children young, and they're going to be young grandparents, and they're going to have an influence on another generation that they wouldn't be able to do if they'd waited. So I'm encouraged by that.
That's really wonderful. I've always been struck in the Old Testament, there's this story of the Israelites going through the wilderness, and they fail to enter the promised land. And the ones who are held responsible for that decision are 20 years old and up. The ones who are 20 years old. So that means 19-year-olds were not held responsible for that decision. Maybe they were responsible in some ways, but at least in terms of the age that is mentioned, they are the ones that could continue on to live in the wilderness, and then they eventually 50-something by the time they enter into the promised land. What age do you think is really adulthood? Like where it seems to be that we're saying that you're really walking alongside them, and then, like we said, maybe behind them at some point. But at what stage does it mean to be an adult? And now it's time for you to spread your wings and to go.
Obviously, the Bible doesn't give us a firm answer on that. I mean, there are probably more factors involved in that age group you just mentioned with respect to the wilderness wandering than just their age. How much of the disobedience were they really a part of? How much of the disobedience were they really responsible for, given the age at which it started, their age when it started? Maybe that figures into it. But I don't think the Bible identifies an age. What you do see, I think, in Scripture is people acting as adults at a much younger age than our culture is willing to acknowledge.
True.
And so, when were people being married then? When were people taking on adult responsibilities? I think about Daniel, taken away from his family, taken away from his homeland, transported to a foreign land, and there he is, by all accounts, at a very young age, and then subjected really to what amounted to a cultural transformation that Babylon is aiming at. And he is standing on the law of God in some areas of conscience that were amazing for his age. And I always thought, I hope that we're raising our children to such in a way and forming convictions to such an extent that if they were ever taken away from us, even at a very young age, they're able to stand their ground as disciples of the living God, which Daniel, I think, manifested. So I don't know if there's an age. I think it's more of a stage that we're aiming at. Lord, help our young people mature early, not in a way that is precocious, not in a way that is sort of a turnoff, that you're acting like you're 30 when you're 12, not that kind of thing, but that fits their age and their maturity, and is exemplary, a way that honors God and reflects well on their parents. Help us to train our children to that end.
Yeah, I wonder if we've, I love that. That's good biblical wisdom. And I wonder if we, even Christians, have a wrong view of what it means to be coming of age. We associate it with like cultural trends, or in our culture, it's like 18 is this coming of age time. And what does that mean? Well, when I was growing up, that meant like, well, you now could have access to certain things that you didn't have access to before then. It's just taking a cue from the culture, or even just how somebody is tried in a court of law and they're being tried as an adult because of this particular thing. And that really varies probably state to state. But I wonder if we're taking our cues from the culture as to whether or not this person has entered into adulthood versus maybe the biblical principles you've just
I think we are. I think we are, because I think we sort of celebrate an age and maybe miss grieving over the fact sometimes that they haven't reached the stage that the age should indicate. And so as I'm parenting them in preparation for that age, they're going to leave my home at 18, or they're going to leave our home at 20. Lord, help me help them be ready for that. That's really what I need to be aiming at, because nothing's magical is going to happen just because they turned 18 in their thinking and their attitudes and their motives and their ambitions. If they're not ready, they're not ready. And it won't matter that they turned the calendar, over the day over on the calendar. What's going to matter is, are they mentally, spiritually, emotionally ready for the world they're about to launch into? That's what I need to be parenting for, not just surviving until they turn 18 years old.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe one final thing, like what exhortation could you give parents? What can parents do, especially parents of teenage or preteen age children, to do to prepare your children well for adulthood?
They should always know that the most important thing for me is their dad. I'm going to speak from the standpoint of my own life, so as a father, but obviously moms listening to us, you would apply this to you as well. I just want them to know that as their father, the most important thing to me is their soul, always. Some of us live for a short time. Some of us live for a long time. All of us are headed toward eternity. And so what is most important for me, for my children, is they would know the living God. They would be genuine disciples of Jesus Christ. I can't produce that, but I can pray for that, and I can teach for that, and I can let them know that in my own ambitions, that's the priority I have for them. So that's where I begin. Second, I want to train them, if they are disciples of Jesus Christ, that the Word of God is their standard. And so I don't want to just teach them that. I want to exemplify that. I want my children to be able to learn, not just from my mouth, but from my ways. And so, Lord, I know I won't be a perfect example, but let me be a genuine example of what it means to love you, which will result in things like loving their mother, which will result in things like loving them enough to tell them the truth, disciplining their disobediences and their sins, but also having the humility to ask for forgiveness when I've got it wrong. And so I want to model all of that. I want to be parenting them in a way that is faithful to the truth, but also faithful to my knowledge of humanness, which will reflect things like patience and gentleness. I think about even, the book of Galatians, that when we confront sin in one another as believers, we do it with gentleness, considering ourselves, lest we also be tempted, So we know our own smallness, which helps us navigate their smallness. And sometimes I think parents with very good motives understand the importance of consistent discipline, which is great, but you can exasperate your children if you also don't reveal an understanding sometimes for the need of patience and gentleness and graciousness and mercy. We need it from God every day. What makes us think our children don't need it? So those sorts of things stand out to me. I want, even as was spoken concerning our Lord, I want to help them develop in every realm of what makes for a well-rounded, godly human being. So I want to help them with their education. I want to help them with social graces, manners, all those things that belong to a well-rounded disciple of Jesus Christ. I want to help them with all those things. And then what I want, finally, I guess I would mention, is when they do reach the stage of adulthood, my goal, my prayer was that we would have done that in such a way that they always know they have an open door with me, and they desire to walk through that door. So there's an admiration, a love that knows that I've loved them, and the result is a lifelong friendship that allows for mutual influence. So my grown kids now have a welcomed influence on my life, and I think I have a welcomed influence in their lives. And that's really what we're aiming at as we parent.
Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Straight Truth Podcast. Now, Straight Truth is listener supported. So if you'd like to find out ways how you can help us to continue to produce this podcast, you can go to our website and find out ways to do that, straighttruth.net. At that website, you'll also find links to all of our previous episodes and our social media channels, so be sure to check it out. Straight Truth is a production of Walking in Grace Ministries, the preaching and teaching ministry of Pastor Richard Caldwell. For more information, go to walkingingrace.org.